Picture this. Around 1200 CE, a small circle of Jewish scholars in Provence, France made a discovery that would shake the foundations of Western spirituality forever. They weren't reading the Torah for stories or commandments anymore. They were decoding it like a cosmic blueprint. What they found hidden between the lines wasn't just mystical poetry. It was a precise map of how consciousness itself flows from the infinite into physical reality, the tree of life, or Etz Chaim in Hebrew. This wasn't metaphor. To them, this was the actual architecture of existence. But here's what's fascinating. For nearly 800 years, this knowledge was deliberately kept secret. Masters would only whisper these teachings to students over 40, married, and already deeply versed in traditional Jewish law. Why such extreme secrecy around what many now casually call Kabbalah? The answer reveals something profound about the nature of reality itself, and why some people seem to navigate life with an almost supernatural understanding, while others remain trapped in cycles they can't break. Here's what most people completely misunderstand about the origins of Kabbalah. They imagine robed mystics lost in abstract meditation, chanting mysterious words in candlelit chambers. The reality is far more extraordinary and intellectually rigorous. The first Kabbalists weren't just mystics, they were the ancient world's equivalent of theoretical physicists. These were brilliant minds who approached the deepest questions of existence with the same methodical precision that modern scientists bring to quantum mechanics. They combined mystical insight with mathematical thinking in a way that hadn't been seen before and frankly hasn't been replicated since. Picture this. While most spiritual traditions of their time relied on faith, ritual, or philosophical speculation, these Jewish sages took a radically different approach. They treated consciousness itself as a laboratory. Instead of accepting reality at face value, they developed systematic methods to observe the underlying patterns that govern existence. What they discovered through decades of intense contemplative practice was breathtaking in its implications. Behind what appears to be the chaotic diversity of our physical world, the endless variety of forms, experiences, and phenomena, lies an underlying mathematical order that repeats at every single level of existence. From the structure of atoms to the formation of galaxies, from individual psychological development to the rise and fall of civilizations, the same fundamental patterns emerge again and again. This wasn't wishful thinking or poetic metaphor. These ancient masters developed rigorous techniques for accessing different layers of reality through disciplined observation of consciousness itself. They would spend years training their minds to perceive beyond the surface level of ordinary experience, mapping the territory of awareness with the same precision that cartographers map physical terrain. The breakthrough came when they realized that human consciousness isn't just a passive observer of reality. It's actually structured in a way that mirrors the fundamental architecture of existence itself. By studying the depths of their own awareness, they were simultaneously studying the blueprint of creation. This revolutionary understanding first appeared in systematic form in a text called the Sefer Yetzirah, or Book of Creation, written around the 6th century. This wasn't another religious scripture filled with moral commandments or historical narratives. It was something entirely different. The first comprehensive manual describing how reality is constructed through specific combinations of primordial elements. But here's the crucial point that most people miss. These weren't physical elements like fire, water, earth, and air. The Kabbalists had discovered something far more fundamental, the basic elements of consciousness itself, the irreducible components from which all experience emerges. The Sefer Yetzirah describes how these elements of pure consciousness combine in precise mathematical relationships to generate every level of manifest reality. It's like having the source code for existence itself, written in a language that bridges the gap between mystical experience and logical analysis. The techniques these ancient masters developed to access these deeper layers of reality were so powerful and potentially dangerous that many remained closely guarded secrets, passed only from teacher to student in carefully controlled circumstances. Some of the most profound methods are still too sensitive to share openly on platforms like YouTube, which is why we reserve the deepest teachings for our private Insights Academy newsletter. It's completely free and you'll receive a limited-time copy of the Kybalion as our gift to you. Through their systematic exploration of consciousness, the Kabbalists made another earth-shattering discovery. They identified 10 fundamental emanations, called sephirot, through which the infinite source of all existence manifests into our finite world. These aren't abstract philosophical concepts that you're supposed to believe in. They're specific states of consciousness that can be directly experienced and verified through practice. Think of it this way. Just as white light contains all colors but requires a prism to reveal its spectrum, the infinite source contains all possibilities but requires these 10 emanations to unfold into the world we experience. Each sephira represents a particular quality or aspect of consciousness, from the purest creative impulse down to the most concrete physical manifestation. The genius of the Kabbalists was recognizing that these emanations don't appear randomly. They follow a precise logical sequence, each one emerging from and building upon the previous ones according to mathematical principles. This creates what became known as the Tree of Life, not just a mystical symbol, but an actual map of how consciousness structures itself into reality. What makes this system truly extraordinary is its universal nature. The same tenfold pattern that governs how the infinite manifests into the physical universe also governs human psychological development. It describes how societies evolve, how natural processes unfold, how creative projects develop from initial inspiration to final completion. This correspondence between macrocosm and microcosm wasn't poetic metaphor for the Kabbalists, it was an operational principle. They had discovered that the same fundamental structure appears at every scale of existence, from the cosmic to the personal. Understanding this pattern gave them a master key to navigate reality across all dimensions. Consider the implications. If you can understand how consciousness structures itself at one level, you can understand how it works at every level. The same principles that govern the formation of galaxies also govern the formation of thoughts. The same patterns that determine how civilizations rise and fall also determine how individual personalities develop and transform. This is why the mathematical mystics of ancient times were so far ahead of their era. They had discovered something that modern science is only beginning to glimpse, that reality isn't just mathematically describable, it's mathematically generated. The universe isn't just following mathematical laws, it's constructed from mathematical relationships at the deepest level. But unlike modern physics, which can describe these patterns from the outside, the Kabbalists developed methods to experience them from within, to participate consciously in the very processes that generate reality itself. Look, here's where things get really fascinating. Those ancient mathematical mystics we just talked about. They didn't just discover abstract principles floating in some theoretical void. They mapped out something incredibly precise, a blueprint that corresponds directly to how consciousness actually operates in your daily experience. And when you see this structure for what it really is, you'll never look at your own creative process the same way again. The Tree of Life isn't mystical poetry, it's functional architecture. 10 specific nodes called sephirot, connected by 22 pathways that correspond exactly to the Hebrew alphabet. But here's what most people miss. This organization isn't some ancient attempt at spiritual decoration. Each component represents a distinct function in how consciousness moves from pure potential into physical reality. Think about the last time you had a genuine breakthrough idea. Not the kind you forced through analysis, but one of those moments when something just clicked into place seemingly out of nowhere. That sudden emergence. That's Kita, the crown, the very first stirring of infinite consciousness toward manifestation. It's the primordial creative impulse, the moment when the vast field of all possibilities begins to focus into something specific. The ancient Kabbalists positioned Keter at the top of the tree because they recognized it as the source point where undifferentiated awareness first moves toward form. You've experienced this countless times, though you might not have recognized the pattern. It's that flash of inspiration that seems to come from beyond your normal thinking process, carrying with it a sense of rightness and creative energy that feels distinctly different from your usual mental activity. Now here's where the architecture becomes really elegant. The tree organizes itself into 3 distinct pillars, and understanding this structure gives you a practical framework for navigating any creative or manifestation process. On the right, you have the pillar of mercy, pure expansive force, the cosmic yes that wants to create, expand, and generate new possibilities. On the left sits the pillar of severity, the containing force that provides structure, boundaries, and the necessary no that gives form to raw creative energy. And running down the center is the pillar of balance, where these two forces harmonize into workable reality. This isn't philosophical speculation. Watch your own creative process, and you'll see these forces at work. Every project, every relationship, every life decision involves this dynamic tension between expansion and containment, between the part of you that wants to explore all possibilities and the part that needs to make practical choices and commitments. Below Keter, the tree splits into this fundamental polarity. Chokmah, wisdom, sits on the pillar of mercy as pure, undirected creative energy. Think of it as the archetypal masculine principle, not in terms of gender, but as the initiating force that sparks new beginnings. Chokmah is raw creative potency, like a seed that contains infinite potential, but hasn't yet found specific direction. Directly across from Chokmah sits Bina, understanding, on the pillar of severity. This is the archetypal feminine principle, the receptive intelligence that takes Chokmah's undirected energy and gives it form, structure, and meaning. If Chokmah is the seed, Bina is the womb, the containing space that allows potential to develop into something concrete and sustainable. You see this dynamic everywhere once you recognize it. The artist's initial inspiration needs the discipline of technique and practice. The entrepreneur's vision requires systems and structure. The lover's passion needs commitment and boundaries. Neither force is complete without the other, and both are necessary for anything meaningful to emerge. Between these upper Sephirot and the rest of the tree lies something the Kabbalists call Da'at, knowledge, though it's often referred to as the hidden Sephirah. Da'at represents the abyss between the archetypal realm of pure principles and the world of form and experience. It's the crossing point where abstract potential becomes concrete possibility, and it's often where creative processes either break through or break down. Moving down the tree, you encounter the second triad, the emotional relationship world where abstract principles begin engaging with actual experience. Chesed, or mercy, expresses as loving kindness, generosity, and the expansive heart that wants to embrace and include. Gevurah, or strength, provides the discriminating force that knows when to say no, when to establish boundaries, and when to cut away what isn't serving the greater vision. Between them sits Tiferet, beauty, the harmonizing center that integrates these forces into balanced relationship. This triad governs how you relate to others and to life itself. Your capacity for genuine generosity flows through Chesed, while your ability to maintain healthy boundaries and make difficult decisions operates through Gevurah. When these forces work together through Tiferet, you experience authentic relationship, neither codependent merger nor defensive isolation, but dynamic engagement that honors both connection and individuality. The third triad brings these relational dynamics into the realm of mind and communication. Netzach, victory, represents the persistence and endurance that keeps pushing toward goals despite obstacles. Hod, splendor, governs intellectual analysis, communication, and the ability to break complex wholes into understandable parts. Yesod, foundation, serves as the integrating center that synthesizes emotional and mental energies into coherent patterns ready for manifestation. Finally, at the base of the tree sits Malchut, kingdom, representing physical manifestation itself. But here's something crucial that most spiritual teachings get backwards. Malchut isn't some inferior realm we're trying to escape. It's the culmination, the place where all the higher energies find tangible expression. The physical world isn't a prison for consciousness. It's consciousness's ultimate creative achievement. Each of the 22 paths connecting these Sephirot corresponds to a Hebrew letter and, in later developments, to specific tarot archetypes. This creates a complete mapping system where any experience, any situation, any creative challenge can be understood in terms of which energies are active and how they're flowing through the overall structure. The remarkable thing is that once you understand this architecture, you start recognizing these patterns everywhere, in your personal development, in business dynamics, in artistic creation, even in how healthy relationships develop and mature. The Tree of Life isn't ancient mysticism. It's a precise description of how consciousness actually works when it's operating at full capacity. Now here's where Kabbalah gets absolutely mind-bending, and why medieval mystics were light years ahead of modern consciousness researchers. After mapping the Tree of Life's 10 Sephirot, these brilliant minds made a discovery that fundamentally changed everything we thought we knew about reality itself. They realized the Tree of Life doesn't exist in just one dimension. It operates simultaneously across 4 completely distinct worlds, each with different density levels, different rules, and different ways consciousness manifests. This wasn't theoretical speculation. They were documenting direct observations of how creation actually functions from the highest spiritual realms down to physical matter. Think about this for a moment. While most people assume reality is just what we can touch and see, these Kabbalists discovered that our physical world is merely the final expression of 3 other invisible worlds operating above it. Every single thing you experience in your daily life, your relationships, your career challenges, even your morning coffee, exists simultaneously in all 4 dimensions. Let me walk you through each world, because understanding this will completely transform how you navigate reality. The highest world is called Atzilut, the world of emanation. This is the realm of pure archetypes, where divine ideas exist in their most refined form, completely unfiltered by any limitation whatsoever. Picture the invisible root system of a massive tree. You can't see it, but it's providing life and direction to everything above ground. That's Atzilut. In this world, there's no separation, no fragmentation, no individual forms as we understand them. It's pure creative potential, the primordial spark where infinite consciousness projects its essence without breaking into pieces. When Kabbalists describe accessing Atzilut through deep meditation, they're talking about touching the source code of reality itself. Here's what's fascinating. Every idea that will ever manifest in physical reality already exists as a perfect archetype in Atzilut. The concept of love, justice, beauty, wisdom, they're not abstract concepts up there, they're living forces with their own intelligence and power. From Atzilut, consciousness steps down into Bariah, the world of creation. Now those pure archetypes begin taking on more defined characteristics, though they're still in the realm of what Plato called perfect ideas. This is the domain of creative intelligences and archangels, the master architects drawing up blueprints for everything that will eventually be built. Think of Bariah as the invisible mold that shapes everything below it. Nothing is physical yet, but everything that will be is already structured and organized. When you have a brilliant creative insight that seems to come from nowhere, you're actually receiving information from Bariah. The great artists, inventors, and visionaries throughout history were masters at accessing this world, downloading complete creative visions that they then spent years manifesting. Medieval Kabbalists understood that the angelic hierarchies operate primarily in Bariah, serving as specialized intelligences that govern different aspects of creation. These aren't cute beings with wings. They're vast organizing principles, cosmic algorithms, if you will, ensuring that divine ideas translate properly into lower worlds. The third world is Yetzirah, the world of formation. And this is where things get really interesting for understanding human psychology. Yetzirah is the realm of emotions, mental images, and psychic energies. Here, those perfect ideas from Bariah take on emotional form and directly influence your individual consciousness. This is the world of dreams, creative imagination, and all the invisible forces shaping your emotional experience. In Yetzirah, concepts come alive through human imagination and emotions, pulsing with colors, sounds, and forms. When you visualize something so clearly you can almost touch it, when you feel moved by music or poetry, when you have prophetic dreams, you're experiencing Yetzirah. What most people don't realize is that Yetzirah is where your emotional patterns and mental habits are actually formed. Those recurring thoughts, those emotional reactions that seem to have a life of their own, they're drawing their energy from formations in Yetzirah. This is why traditional Kabbalistic practice includes so much work with visualization and emotional purification. Finally, we reach Asiya, the world of action, our physical dimension, where energies from all 3 higher worlds culminate in tangible experience. But here's the crucial point the mystics understood. Asiya isn't inferior to the higher worlds. It's the visible fruit of the invisible, the living testimony of divine light's complete descent into matter. Everything happening in physical reality is the final expression of processes that began in Atzilut, were organized in Bariah, took emotional form in Yetzirah, and now manifest as concrete experience in Asiya. This means that if you want to create lasting change in your physical circumstances, you need to understand what's happening in the higher worlds first. Let me give you a powerful example that makes this crystal clear. Consider a romantic relationship. In Atzilut, it exists as the pure archetype of love itself, the divine principle of two becoming one, while remaining distinct. In Bariah, it takes form as the specific soul patterns of two individuals whose destinies are designed to interweave. In Yetzirah, it manifests as the actual emotions, attractions, dreams, and psychic connection between two people. And in Asiya, it becomes the physical meetings, conversations, touches, and shared experiences. Most people only pay attention to the Asiya level, what's happening physically. But Kabbalists understood that the real dynamics are occurring in the higher worlds. If there are problems in the relationship's Yetzirah level, conflicting emotional patterns, unresolved psychological material, no amount of physical effort in Asiya will create lasting harmony. This is why traditional Kabbalah developed sophisticated techniques for consciously navigating between worlds. Through specific forms of meditation, study, ritual practice, and ethical contemplation, practitioners learn to perceive and work with all four dimensions simultaneously. When you develop this ability, your entire approach to life transforms. Instead of just reacting to external circumstances, you begin understanding that physical events originate from dynamics in the higher worlds. You can influence situations at their source rather than just dealing with their final manifestations. The most successful people throughout history, whether they knew Kabbalah or not, were instinctively working with multiple worlds simultaneously. They weren't just focused on physical action, they were visualizing outcomes, aligning with higher principles, and working with the invisible forces that shape material reality. This four-world framework explains why purely materialistic approaches to life often feel hollow and unsatisfying. When you're only operating in Asiya, you're missing 3/4 of what's actually happening. You're trying to change the fruit while ignoring the roots, branches, and trunk that determine what kind of fruit can grow. Understanding the four worlds gives you a complete map for conscious creation and spiritual development, showing you exactly how consciousness manifests from the highest spiritual realms down into your daily experience. Here's where Kabbalah gets absolutely mind-bending, and this is the piece that most people completely miss. We've talked about the 10 Sephirot and the four worlds, but now you need to understand something that will fundamentally change how you see reality itself. Each Sephirah doesn't just exist once. Each one exists simultaneously in all four worlds. Think about what this means. You're not looking at 10 centers of consciousness. You're looking at 40 interconnected points of awareness, operating across multiple dimensions of reality at the same time. This is why genuine transformation often happens in ways that seem completely random or unexpected. When you consciously work with one Sephirah in one world, you're automatically influencing its corresponding manifestations in the other 3 worlds, whether you realize it or not. Let me give you a concrete example. Say you're developing Hesed, that's compassionate love, in the emotional world of Yetzirah. Maybe you're practicing genuine forgiveness towards someone who hurt you, really feeling that shift in your heart. What the Kabbalists discovered is that this emotional work automatically begins influencing the Chesed in Atzilut, the divine world, opening you to higher spiritual love. It affects Chesed in Bariah, the mental world, giving you new understanding about the nature of love itself. And it manifests Chesed in Asiya, the physical world, through actual changes in your behavior and circumstances. This is why people who do deep inner work often report that their external world starts shifting in mysterious ways. It's not magic, it's the natural consequence of working within this 40-point matrix of consciousness. The Kabbalists developed specific techniques for each world because they understood this interconnection. For Atzilut, the divine world, they used pure contemplation of divine names, not as words, but as frequencies of consciousness that bypass the thinking mind entirely. For Bariah, the mental world, they engaged in deep study of sacred texts and philosophical inquiry, training the mind to hold increasingly complex spiritual concepts. For Yetzirah, the emotional world, they developed imaginative practices and symbolic rituals that work directly with the feeling nature. And for Asiya, the physical world, They emphasized concrete ethical actions, how you treat people, how you handle money, how you care for your body. This multidimensional approach explains something crucial that the tradition has always emphasized. Knowledge without practical application is completely sterile, while action without understanding is blind. You need all four levels working together for genuine transformation. But here's what really blew my mind when I first grasped this. We're not passive observers of reality. We're active participants in its continuous creation. Every thought you think, every emotion you feel, every action you take is contributing to the flow of creative energies through these worlds. You're literally helping to create reality through your consciousness. Once you understand this matrix, everything changes. That business meeting you're going to tomorrow? It's not just a physical interaction between people trying to make money. It's the interplay of archetypal forces, maybe Gevura, the power of discernment and boundaries, meeting Hesed, the impulse toward expansion and generosity. There are emotional dynamics playing out in Yetzirah, mental concepts and strategies operating in Bariah, and yes, practical physical concerns in Asiya. But behind it all, there are spiritual principles from Atzilut influencing the entire situation. When you start seeing life this way, you realize that mastery isn't about manipulating external symbols or performing rituals to get what you want. That's completely missing the point. Real mastery is learning to consciously participate in the fundamental creative processes that are always operating. The four worlds correspond directly to different aspects of your human experience. Your spiritual life operates primarily in Atzilut, those moments of connection to something greater than yourself, experiences of unity, glimpses of transcendent love or wisdom. Your mental life functions in Bariah, your capacity for abstract thinking, philosophical understanding, creative problem solving. Your emotional life plays out in Yetzirah, your feelings, desires, imaginative life, the realm of symbols and dreams. And your physical life manifests in Asiya, your body, your actions, your material circumstances, your impact on the physical world. Here's what's revolutionary about this understanding. Authentic development requires harmonious integration of all four levels. This completely resolves the false dichotomy that's plagued spirituality for centuries. The idea that you either transcend the physical world or you focus exclusively on material manifestation. The Kabbalists understood that trying to develop spiritually while neglecting your physical health and ethical behavior is delusional. But they also knew that focusing only on material success while ignoring your emotional and spiritual development is equally limiting. The matrix demands integration. I've seen people try to use Kabbalistic concepts to manifest money or relationships while completely ignoring their need for genuine self-knowledge or spiritual connection. It doesn't work because you can't manipulate one level without the others responding. The system is too interconnected. On the flip side, I've met people who've spent years in meditation and spiritual study but refuse to deal with practical concerns like earning a living or maintaining healthy relationships. They're trying to operate in Atzilut while ignoring Asiya, and they wonder why their spiritual insights don't translate into actual transformation. The Matrix teaches you that consciousness is movement. It's not a static thing you possess. It's a dynamic flow between dimensions. When you understand this, the Tree of Life stops being a map you study and becomes a living representation of how awareness moves between levels of reality. You start recognizing these movements in your daily experience. That moment when a conversation suddenly shifts from small talk to something meaningful, you just witnessed consciousness moving from Asiya to Yetzirah. When you're struggling with a problem and suddenly see it from a completely different perspective, that's the movement from Bariah to a higher level of understanding. The real power comes when you learn to consciously participate in these movements, working with the natural flow of creative energy rather than against it. This is what the Kabbalists meant by becoming a partner in creation, not controlling reality, but consciously participating in the processes through which reality continuously creates itself. Now here's where Kabbalah gets truly revolutionary, and why every genuine spiritual seeker needs to understand this process. We've explored how consciousness descends from source into manifestation through the Tree of Life. But the real question is, how do we make the journey back? Most spiritual traditions treat this like some mystical escape from the world, but that completely misses the point. The Kabbalistic path of return isn't about abandoning physical reality. It's about transforming your relationship with every level of existence so you can participate more fully, more consciously, and more powerfully than you ever imagined possible. Let's start where you actually are right now. You're in Malkut, the kingdom of physical manifestation. This is where most of us spend our entire lives, completely identified with our physical bodies, our survival needs, our social roles. You wake up, you worry about money, you navigate relationships, you deal with your health, you try to get ahead in the world. Nothing wrong with any of that. Malkut is absolutely real and absolutely important. But here's what changes everything. The first initiation happens when you suddenly recognize that this physical experience is just one layer of a vastly more complex reality. And I'm not talking about believing some philosophy or reading it in a book. I'm talking about direct, undeniable experience. Maybe you've had moments like this. You're walking in nature and suddenly the boundaries between you and everything around you dissolve. Or you're in deep meditation and realize you're not separate from the awareness that's observing your thoughts. Or you're holding your newborn child and get hit with this overwhelming recognition of the sacred intelligence flowing through everything. These aren't paranormal experiences. They're natural revelations of reality's actual structure when your conditioned mind relaxes its habitual limitations. This is your invitation out of exclusive identification with Malkut. You don't leave the physical world behind. You start recognizing it as one magnificent expression of something infinitely larger. The movement from Malkut to Yesod represents one of the most crucial transitions in genuine spiritual development. Yesod is the foundation, the realm of subtle energies, creative imagination, and meaningful dreams. Instead of identifying exclusively with your physical body, you begin recognizing that you also have energetic and emotional bodies that are equally real and far more fluid. Yesod governs the creative imagination, and learning to work consciously with these energies becomes essential for any real spiritual progress. This is why so many esoteric traditions focus extensively on developing Yesod capacities, creative visualization, working with symbols and archetypes, understanding natural cycles and lunar rhythms, learning to navigate the dream state consciously. But here's the trap that catches countless spiritual seekers. Yesod can become absolutely fascinating. You start having vivid dreams, meaningful synchronicities, powerful visualizations. You might develop psychic abilities, or start seeing auras, or communicating with non-physical beings. This is all legitimate and valuable, but Yesod is the foundation, not the destination. Getting fixated here is like building an incredible basement and never constructing the house above it. The real work begins as you ascend into what Kabbalists call the emotional triad, Hod, Netzach, and Tiferet. This is where you develop genuine emotional intelligence, not the superficial kind taught in corporate workshops, but the deep capacity to work skillfully with the full spectrum of human feeling and creative expression. Hod cultivates your ability to understand and precisely communicate your inner experience. Instead of being overwhelmed by emotions or suppressing them, you learn to recognize their intelligence, their messages, their appropriate expressions. You develop the capacity for genuine introspection and honest self-assessment without falling into either narcissistic self-obsession or self-destructive criticism. Netzach develops perseverance and creative vitality in the face of real challenges. This isn't positive thinking or spiritual bypassing. It's the deep resilience that comes from recognizing your essential nature as indestructible creative consciousness. You learn to work with defeat, disappointment, and difficulty as raw materials for growth rather than evidence of failure. Tiferet integrates Hod and Netzach into balanced, compassionate wisdom. Located at the very center of the tree of life, Tiferet represents the integrated, harmonious personality, someone who has developed genuine self-knowledge, emotional mastery, and the capacity for authentic relationship with others. Many spiritual traditions consider reaching Tiferet the ultimate goal of human development. You've become a mature, balanced, psychologically healthy human being capable of love, wisdom, and effective action in the world. And that's genuinely magnificent. Most people never get anywhere close to this level of integration. But Kabbalists recognize Tiferet as an essential, intermediate stage, not the final destination. Because the transition from Tiferet to the upper triad, Hesed, Gevurah, and Da'at, represents the passage from personal development to transpersonal participation. This is where individual consciousness begins recognizing itself as an expression of universal consciousness. Hesed develops unconditional love and spiritual generosity. Not the emotional attachment we usually call love, but the recognition that your essential nature is identical with the creative principle that manifests as all beings and all experiences. This generates spontaneous compassion and the genuine desire to serve the awakening of consciousness wherever you encounter it. Gevurah cultivates spiritual discernment and the courage to confront illusions wherever they appear, especially your own. This isn't harsh judgment, but the precise discrimination that can distinguish between what serves awakening and what perpetuates unconsciousness. Gevurah gives you the strength to say no to what diminishes life and yes to what enhances it, regardless of social pressure or personal comfort. Da'at represents the integration of Hesed and Gevurah into direct knowledge of the principles that actually operate reality. Not intellectual understanding, but participatory awareness of how consciousness creates, sustains, and transforms all experience. And here's what makes this path so practical and powerful. Each level doesn't replace the previous ones. It transforms and includes them. You don't transcend your physical body, your emotions, or your personality. You recognize them as instruments of consciousness and learn to work with them consciously rather than being unconsciously driven by them. This is why the Kabbalistic path produces individuals who are more effective in every dimension of life, not less. They're not escaping the world, they're participating in it from a completely different level of awareness and capability. But we're still not at the top of the tree. The final triad, Chokmah, Bina, and Keter, represents something that will completely revolutionize your understanding of what human consciousness is actually capable of achieving. Now we reach the most profound and challenging aspect of Kabbalistic development, the crossing of the abyss. This isn't some mystical metaphor or poetic flourish. The abyss represents a very real psychological and spiritual threshold that every serious practitioner must eventually face. It's the chasm between the lower 7 Sephirot, where we operate with our familiar sense of individual identity, and the supernal triad above, Bina, Chokmah, and Keter. Most people spend their entire lives functioning exclusively in the lower worlds. You wake up as you, go through your day as you, solve problems as you, relate to others as you. This sense of being a separate, bounded individual feels so fundamental that questioning it seems absurd. But here's what the Kabbalistic masters discovered through centuries of inner exploration. This exclusive identification with your personal self is actually a kind of cosmic tunnel vision. The crossing point is called Da'at, often translated as knowledge, but really meaning direct, experiential knowing rather than intellectual understanding. Da'at isn't technically a sephira, but rather the gateway where your individual consciousness must undergo what can only be described as ego death. Now, before you picture some dramatic mystical experience, understand what this actually means. Your ego, your sense of being a separate person with a unique history, personality, and identity, doesn't get annihilated. Instead, it gets radically contextualized. Think of a wave on the ocean. The wave has a distinct shape, height, and movement pattern. It's genuinely unique and individual. But at some point, that wave might realize that while it's definitely a wave, it's also entirely made of ocean. The wave doesn't disappear when it has this recognition. It's still moving, still has its particular form, but its entire sense of what it is expands dramatically. It discovers it's simultaneously an individual expression and the entire ocean expressing through this particular form. This is what happens when consciousness crosses the abyss. Your personal identity doesn't vanish. It becomes recognized as one particular way that universal consciousness is experiencing itself. This recognition fundamentally changes everything while changing nothing. You're still you, but you is now understood as a temporary focusing of something infinitely larger. The entry into Bina marks the beginning of what we might call personal development. Bina is often called the Great Mother or Understanding, but these traditional names barely hint at what's actually occurring here. In Bina, you begin developing direct recognition of the structuring principles that organize all experience. This isn't intellectual comprehension. You can study systems theory or philosophy for decades without touching this. Instead, It's a lived understanding of how consciousness organizes itself into the patterns we call reality. Operating from Bina, you start perceiving the underlying architecture of experience itself. You see how thoughts form, how emotions arise and dissolve, how relationships create themselves through invisible dynamics, how entire cultures maintain themselves through shared but unconscious agreements. It's like developing X-ray vision for the hidden structures that shape everything we consider normal life. Chokmah represents an even more radical shift, participation in what Kabbalists call the dynamic, creative force driving all manifestation. If Bina is about recognizing structure, Chokmah is about joining the creative impulse itself. This is the pure yes of existence, the fundamental drive toward expression and becoming that moves through every form of life. When consciousness operates from Chokmah, you're no longer just observing the creative process or trying to direct it from outside. You become a conscious participant in the universe's ongoing creativity. Your thoughts, words, and actions become direct expressions of the same force that grows galaxies and evolves species. This isn't megalomania, it's the recognition that this creative force was always what was thinking your thoughts and moving your body. Now it's just happening consciously. Keter, the crown, represents the recognition of fundamental unity underlying all apparent diversity. Here, the distinction between observer and observed, self and cosmos, individual and universal, dissolves into what can only be called primordial awareness. Keter is where you discover what you actually are beneath all the layers of identity, personality, and individual history. But here's the crucial point that distinguishes Kabbalah from many mystical traditions. This ascent through the supernal triad isn't meant to be a permanent escape from ordinary consciousness. The Kabbalistic path involves continuous movement up and down the tree of life, integrating higher realizations with practical responsibilities at every level. A mature Kabbalistic practitioner develops the capacity to function simultaneously at multiple levels as circumstances require. When contemplating the deep mysteries of existence, they operate from Keter, experiencing the unified field of consciousness. During social interactions, they might function primarily from Tiferet, bringing integrated wisdom and compassion to their relationships. When handling practical tasks, they ground themselves in Malchut, fully present to physical reality and immediate responsibilities. This multidimensional flexibility represents genuine spiritual maturity. Instead of getting stuck in any single state or level, you become fluid, able to access whatever quality of consciousness serves the situation at hand. You might spend the morning in deep meditation touching the unity of Keter, then shift into the structured understanding of Bina for a complex work project, then ground into the nurturing energy of Hesed when your child needs comfort. The realized Kabbalist understands there's simultaneously an individual drop in the ocean of consciousness and the entire ocean expressing through this particular form. This recognition transforms every aspect of living. Every action becomes an opportunity to express divine qualities through human form. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to practice virtue and develop wisdom. Every relationship becomes a context for discovering the divine aspects in yourself and others. This is why serious Kabbalistic practice requires such dedication and patience. You're not just learning concepts or techniques, you're actually restructuring your entire relationship to existence itself. You're discovering that what you thought was your individual life is actually universal consciousness playing at being you, while simultaneously recognizing that this playing is the most serious and sacred activity in the cosmos. The path beyond the abyss reveals that awakening isn't about transcending your humanity, but about discovering what your humanity actually is, consciousness itself, exploring its own infinite creativity through the beautiful limitations of individual form. You know what changes everything? When you stop seeing the tree of life as some mystical diagram on the wall and start recognizing it as the actual blueprint of your daily experience. Every conversation you have, every decision you make, every challenge you face, it's all happening within this cosmic framework, whether you realize it or not. Here's what I mean. Yesterday you probably dealt with some kind of conflict at work, right? Maybe your boss came down hard on a project, or a colleague pushed back on your ideas. Most people just react, they get defensive, they shut down, or they fight back. But when you understand the tree, you see something completely different happening. That tension you felt? That's the eternal dance between Hesed and Gevurah playing out in real time. Hesed is that part of you that wants to give, to understand, to extend mercy, and see everyone's perspective. Gevurah is the necessary force that says, no, this isn't acceptable. It's boundaries, it's standards, it's the strength to cut away what doesn't serve. Most of us get stuck thinking one of these is good and the other is bad. We either become doormats who can't set boundaries, or we become rigid controllers who can't show compassion. But the tree teaches you something profound. Both forces are divine, both are necessary, and wisdom lies in knowing which one to express when. So when your boss criticized your work, instead of just reacting emotionally, you could pause and ask, what's really needed here? Is this a moment for chesed, to listen deeply, to understand their pressure, to respond with patience? Or is this a gevurah moment, to stand firm in your standards, to protect your integrity, to set clear boundaries? This isn't just positive thinking or conflict resolution techniques. This is recognizing that the same cosmic forces that structure the universe are structuring your Tuesday afternoon meeting. You're not just managing workplace drama, you're participating consciously in the fundamental dynamics of creation itself. But here's where it gets really practical. Let's say you're dealing with a creative block. You sit down to write, to design, to solve a great problem, and nothing flows. The conventional approach is to push harder, drink more coffee, force it. But tree consciousness gives you a completely different toolkit. Is this a yesod issue? Yesod is foundation. Maybe your creative block exists because you haven't done the foundational work. You're trying to create from thin air instead of building on solid research, preparation, or skill development. Or maybe it's a HOD problem. HOD governs communication and analysis. Perhaps you're overthinking, getting trapped in endless mental loops instead of trusting the creative process. See how this changes everything? Instead of just being stuck, you now have a diagnostic framework. You can investigate which sephira is out of balance and apply the appropriate remedy. Yesod problems need foundational work. HOD problems need you to step out of analysis paralysis and trust your intuition. That's Netzach territory. Now let's go deeper. Remember how we talked about the four worlds in earlier sections? This is where Kabbalah becomes genuinely revolutionary for problem solving. Most people try to fix everything at the same level where they experience the problem. But the tree teaches you that every issue exists simultaneously across multiple dimensions of reality. Take relationship problems, something everyone deals with. You and your partner keep having the same fight over and over. The conventional approach focuses on asiyah, the physical world. You try to change behaviors, establish new rules, maybe go to couples therapy to work on communication techniques. But what if the real issue is happening in Bariah, the mental world? Maybe you're operating from completely different conceptual frameworks about what relationships should be. One of you believes love means constant togetherness. The other believes it means supporting each other's independence. No amount of Asia-level behavior modification will resolve a Bariah-level conceptual mismatch. Or the problem might be even deeper, in Atzilut, the archetypal realm. Maybe you're fundamentally different archetypal types. One of you is wired for stability and security, the other for adventure and change. This isn't a problem to solve, it's a cosmic dynamic to understand and work with consciously. This is why so much therapy and self-help fails. It's trying to fix absolute problems with Aziyah solutions, or addressing Yetzirah emotional patterns with Bariah mental strategies. The tree gives you the wisdom to diagnose what level an issue actually exists on and apply interventions at the appropriate dimension. But here's what makes this truly transformative. When you start living this way, your entire day becomes a conscious spiritual laboratory. You wake up in the morning, and instead of just stumbling through routine, you're actively experimenting with cosmic principles. Maybe you start with Keta meditation, connecting with that source consciousness we explored in the last section. Just 5 minutes of recognizing yourself as an expression of infinite awareness. Then you move into Chokmah, opening to creative inspiration, asking what wants to emerge through you today. Throughout the day, you're consciously working with the emotional triad. In conversations, you're aware of when to express Hesed's unconditional acceptance and when Gevurah's discernment is needed. When you're pushing toward goals, you recognize whether this calls for Netzach's persistent drive or Hod's strategic communication. And here's the beautiful thing. This isn't about becoming some perfect spiritual robot. It's about developing genuine discernment, real wisdom, the kind that emerges through conscious experimentation rather than following rigid rules. Because life keeps presenting you with the same basic questions in infinite variations. When do you push and when do you yield? When do you speak and when do you listen? When do you hold on and when do you let go? The tree doesn't give you the answers, it gives you the framework to discover the answers through conscious engagement with your actual experience. This is how Kabbalah resolves one of the biggest confusions in spiritual development. Some traditions tell you to transcend the physical world, to rise above material concerns. Others focus entirely on manifestation and material success. Both miss the point. Authentic development requires conscious participation in all levels simultaneously. You're not trying to escape Malchut, the physical world. You're learning to express divine consciousness through Malchut. You're not transcending your emotions. You're learning to feel with the full spectrum of cosmic intelligence. This is what transforms ordinary life into continuous spiritual awakening, not through dramatic mystical experiences, but through bringing conscious awareness to the eternal patterns that are always operating through your daily experience. When you really get this, every interaction becomes an opportunity to explore divine dynamics. Every challenge becomes a chance to experiment with cosmic principles. Every day becomes a laboratory for conscious evolution. What I'm about to share with you might completely shift how you understand spiritual traditions, consciousness research, and even reality itself. After years of studying mystical systems across cultures, I've discovered something remarkable that most people never notice. The tree of life isn't unique to Kabbalah. It appears everywhere, in forms so consistent, it's almost impossible to ignore once you see it. Let me show you what I mean. Take the Hindu chakra system. 7 energy centers running up the spine. When you map these against the tree of life, something extraordinary emerges. The root chakra corresponds perfectly to Malkuth, your physical foundation. The sacral chakra aligns with Yesod, governing creativity and sexuality. Solar plexus matches Hod and Netzach, personal power and emotional expression. Heart chakra sits at Tifereth, the center of balanced consciousness. Throat chakra connects to Gebura and Hesed, authentic expression requiring both strength and compassion. Third eye opens at Binah and Chokmah, intuitive understanding and divine wisdom. Crown chakra touches Ketha, unity consciousness. This isn't coincidental borrowing between traditions. These systems developed independently, separated by geography and centuries, yet they describe identical consciousness architecture. Buddhist meditation stages follow the same pattern. The initial mindfulness practices work with Malkuth, grounding awareness in present moment experience. Concentration development corresponds to Yesod, stabilizing mental formations. The jhana states map directly onto the middle pillar progression, systematic refinement of consciousness through increasingly subtle awareness levels. Insight practices activate Binah and Chokmah, direct perception of impermanence and interdependence. Final liberation touches Ketha, the dissolution of separate self into universal awareness. Even Christian mystical traditions describe this identical journey. The purgative way corresponds to lower tree work, purifying ego attachments and desires. The illuminative way maps to middle tree development, receiving divine grace and developing spiritual virtues. The unitive way reaches upper tree realization, direct union with divine consciousness. Saint John of the Cross's dark night of the soul is precisely the Darat transition we explored earlier, ego death preceding higher awakening. Indigenous shamanic practices worldwide work with equivalent force dynamics. The lower world journeys correspond to Malkuth through Yesod, working with earth energies and ancestral wisdom. Middle world healing engages Hod through Hesed, balancing personal and community forces. Upper world vision quests activate Binah through Ketha, receiving guidance from cosmic consciousness levels. Greek philosophy laid out emanation theories that mirror tree structure perfectly. Plotinus described reality flowing from the one through intellect to soul to matter, exactly the 4 worlds progression from Atziluth through Asaya. Platonic ideals correspond to Sephiro, archetypal patterns underlying manifest reality. Sufi spiritual stations follow identical developmental sequences. The nafs levels, ego purification stages, map directly onto tree ascension. Fana and Baka, Extinction and Subsistence in Divine Consciousness, describe the Da'at transition and upper tree realization with remarkable precision. Here's where it gets really interesting. Modern psychology independently discovered these same patterns. Carl Jung's individuation process follows tree structure. Integrating shadow material corresponds to lower tree work, developing authentic personality maps to middle tree, and accessing collective unconscious touches upper tree levels. Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs mirrors Sephirot progression from survival through self-actualization to self-transcendence. Developmental psychology confirms these stages appear universally. Ken Wilber's integral theory maps consciousness development through levels that correspond exactly to tree progression, from egocentric through ethnocentric to world-centric to cosmocentric awareness. Neuroscience research increasingly validates Kabbalistic insights about multi-layered consciousness. Brain hemisphere functions correspond to tree pillars. Left hemisphere analytical processing aligns with the pillar of severity. Right hemisphere intuitive processing matches the pillar of mercy, while integrated whole brain functioning activates the middle pillar. Meditation produces measurable changes in brain states that correspond to different Sephirot activations. Quantum physics reveals principles that align perfectly with Kabbalistic understanding. The observer effect, consciousness participation in reality creation, matches the tree teaching that awareness shapes experience through different Sephirot filters. Non-local connection between quantum particles mirrors Kabbalistic understanding of underlying unity expressing through apparent separation. Even more surprising, tree principles appear in areas you'd never expect. Successful business organizational structures naturally evolve toward tree patterns. Foundation departments handle Malkuth functions. Creative teams work with Yesod energy. Analytical divisions embody Hod principles. Marketing expresses Netzach qualities. Executive leadership balances Gebura and Hesed forces. Vision and strategy activate Bina and Chokmah, while company mission touches Ketha purpose. Therapeutic approaches unconsciously utilize Sephirot dynamics. Cognitive behavioral therapy works with Hod, restructuring thought patterns. Emotional processing therapies engage Netzach, healing feeling responses. Body-based therapies activate Malkuth, releasing stored trauma. Integration approaches balance forces through middle pillar work. Artistic and creative processes follow tree-like development stages. Initial inspiration touches upper tree levels. Conceptual development works through Bina and Chokmah. Creative expression balances Gebura discipline with Chesed flow. Technical skill development engages Hod precision. Emotional authenticity requires Netzach courage. Foundation building utilizes Yesod imagination. Final manifestation grounds through Malkuth completion. Understanding these universal principles enables more effective engagement with any system or tradition. Someone familiar with tree structure can quickly grasp Buddhist mindfulness stages, Christian contemplative practices, or modern psychological frameworks because they recognize underlying archetypal patterns. This creates bridge-building capacity between traditions that often seem incompatible on surface levels. Think about what this universality actually means. When diverse cultures separated by thousands of miles and years arrive at similar consciousness maps, they're not describing culturally specific beliefs, they're mapping objective features of human potential. The tree represents natural consciousness evolution patterns rather than imposed religious doctrine. Every human apparently contains these potentials in embryonic form. Spiritual work simply awakens existing capacities rather than creating something foreign. This understanding removes much effort and tension from practice. Instead of striving toward distant goals, you learn to unfold qualities already present within your consciousness architecture. The Tree of Life isn't just an ancient symbol, it's the universal operating system of human consciousness itself, waiting for you to recognize and activate its inherent wisdom. Look, we've covered thousands of years of history, explored the deepest mysteries of consciousness, and mapped the universal patterns that govern reality itself. But here's what separates genuine seekers from spiritual tourists. Everything I've shared means absolutely nothing unless you test it yourself. Don't believe a single word because it sounds ancient or mystical. Don't accept these principles because they appear in multiple traditions, or because some rabbi or mystic proclaimed them centuries ago. The tree of life isn't asking for your belief, it's inviting your direct investigation. And that investigation begins with recognizing that you already contain every sephira, every pathway, every level of consciousness we've discussed. The most profound realization in authentic Kabbalistic practice is this: you're not trying to acquire something external or climb some spiritual ladder to reach God. You're awakening to what's already present, learning to consciously navigate the dimensions of awareness that operate through you every moment. So let's get practical. Real Kabbalistic work starts with Malkut, grounded, physical reality. Before you even think about mystical experiences or higher consciousness, establish your foundation. This means paying attention to your body, your immediate environment, your basic responsibilities. Take daily walks without distractions. Feel your feet connecting with the earth. Notice how your breathing changes throughout the day. I've watched countless people try to rush toward Kita consciousness while their Malkut foundation crumbles around them. Their relationships deteriorate, their work suffers, their physical health declines, but they're convinced they're having profound spiritual experiences. This isn't awakening, it's spiritual bypassing, and it leads nowhere meaningful. Once you're genuinely grounded in Malkut, begin working with Yesod through creative visualization. Spend 10 minutes each morning imagining your day unfolding with clarity and purpose. Not fantasy or wishful thinking, but clear mental rehearsal of how you want to show up in various situations. Notice how this affects your actual experiences. Then develop HOD through precise communication. Practice saying exactly what you mean without unnecessary words. Listen completely before responding. Watch how clear communication transforms your relationships and professional interactions. This isn't mystical theory, it's practical magic that anyone can verify. Cultivate Netzach by choosing one challenging project and persisting through obstacles without forcing outcomes. Whether it's learning an instrument, developing a skill, or healing a relationship, use it as laboratory for understanding how victory emerges through sustained, intelligent effort rather than aggressive pushing. Here's your daily Keta practice. Spend 5 to 10 minutes each morning connecting with source consciousness. Not through complicated rituals or exotic techniques, but through simple recognition. Sit quietly and acknowledge the awareness that's aware of your thoughts, emotions, and sensations. Don't try to achieve any particular state. Just recognize the unchanging presence that witnesses all changing experience. Choose one sephira each month for focused development. If you're working with Chesed, look for opportunities to give generously without expectation. If exploring Gevura, practice saying no to requests that don't align with your deeper purpose. If cultivating Tiferet, seek beauty in ordinary moments and express it through your actions. The Four Worlds framework becomes incredibly practical when you learn to diagnose where problems originate. Physical health issues often require Asaya solutions. Better nutrition, exercise, medical attention. Emotional conflicts might need Yetzirah work, understanding feelings, improving communication, healing old wounds. Mental confusion calls for Bariah clarity, examining beliefs, studying principles, developing wisdom. Spiritual emptiness demands Atzilut connection, remembering your essential nature, aligning with deeper purpose. Map your current life situations through the tree. Analyze your career through each sephira. Is your work grounded in practical value, Malkut? Does it engage your creative abilities? Yesod. Are you communicating effectively with colleagues? Hod. Do you persist through challenges? Netzach. Are you generous with your knowledge and resources? Chesed. Can you set appropriate boundaries? Gevura. Does your work express beauty and balance? Tiferet. Are you developing genuine expertise? Bina. Do you contribute innovative ideas? Chokmah. Does it align with your deepest purpose? Keta. This same mapping applies to relationships, creative projects, health challenges, financial situations. Everything in your life can be understood and improved through Sephirotic analysis. Now, let me warn you about the most common mistakes that derail authentic practice. First, trying to rush through levels instead of thoroughly developing each foundation. Second, focusing exclusively on upper Sephirot while neglecting the practical work of lower ones. Third, using tree knowledge to feel spiritually superior rather than becoming more effective in ordinary life. Authentic Kabbalistic development always increases your practical effectiveness and compassionate engagement with the world. If your practice makes you feel special, chosen, or separate from others, you're developing spiritual ego rather than genuine realization. Real progress manifests as increased humility, clearer thinking, more skillful action, and deeper love for all existence. When seeking teachers or communities, look for these signs of authenticity, emphasis on practical application rather than exotic experiences, integration of all tree levels rather than focus on mystical highs, ethical development alongside mystical insight, and encouragement of direct experimentation over blind belief. Avoid commercialized versions promising quick results or secret powers. Genuine Kabbalistic teaching is always humble, practical, and oriented towards service rather than personal aggrandizement. The Tree of Life offers the most complete framework for integral human development ever articulated. It's not about escaping ordinary life, but engaging more fully with all dimensions of existence. Your goal isn't to transcend your humanity, but to become more completely human while recognizing your divine nature, not to withdraw from the world, but to serve it more skillfully. You already contain everything needed for complete realization. Your journey is simply awakening what already exists within you, learning to consciously participate in the cosmic processes that operate through every moment of your experience. The Tree of Life reveals that you already contain everything needed for complete realization. Your journey is simply awakening what already exists within you, and if this understanding resonates with your deepest knowing, let us know by commenting, "I understood it."